Good morning. Good morning. Let me ask you to please have your seats. We're about to get started. So good morning, everyone who is here at Columbia Global Centers, and also good morning to our audience, wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the time may be where you are. We are delighted that you're joining us today for this event on how data can help energize the world and improve livelihoods. My name is Murugi Dirango, and I'm the director of Columbia Global Centers Nairobi. Columbia Global Centers Nairobi is part of 9 centers that are established in different parts of the world by Columbia University to connect the regions where we are back to Columbia University to do research, to do education programming, and to do public programming. So this morning, we are very excited to be hosting Professor Vijay Modi and his team of panelists and other expert speakers to the Global Center to discuss this very, very vital topic. We hope you enjoy your session. It's a hybrid session, so we have some people who are here at the center, but we also have people who are online joining us. So I'd like them to welcome Professor Vijay to now take over and tell us what are the next steps. Welcome, Vijay.
Anyways, I'll introduce the event a little bit, and hopefully we can fix the mics in that time. So good morning. My name is Aaron Leopold. I've been working on energy access for about 12 years in various leadership roles in the not-for-profit space, private sector, and industry associations. And throughout this time, demand simulation and rural livelihoods opportunities have been really the focus and the passion of my work. And I could not be more excited about the increased interest in productive uses and demand stimulation as a centerpiece for the future of the renewable energy sector across the world. I think many of you know, it's an anecdote that is often shared, but in both Europe and the United States, during the electrification phases of those continents, it was very, very common in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and even 60s for energy companies to also sell appliances, because areas that have just received electricity inherently don't have electronics shops everywhere nearby because they just had their connection set up recently. And so this is a phenomenon that we have seen across the world, where productive uses, as we're calling them now, have always been a game-changing element for electrification. And we are now recycling the ideas and practices of our parents and grandparents, although we're calling it innovative business, which is somehow ironic, but also we need to remember that history repeats itself and we need to learn from our ancestors. And I think what we can do with the data and the evidence that is going to be presented today on what is working is really take that learning and start acting. And that's what we really want to see. So today I am the CEO of EnerGrow, which is one of the only companies on the continent that is really dedicated only to demand stimulation. So our business model is to partner with energy companies and help support their load growth through microfinance for productive use technologies. We are one of many players on the productive use landscape, and we have so many here on the phone with us today. And I'm very excited to now to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. I will be moderating the session today, but we have a number of key sector players who will be mentioning the work that they are doing, and we will be doing a moderated discussion where we're going to go back and forth. We want this to be a conversation. This is not supposed to be extremely formal. We'll have a presentation from Professor Modi, of course, about the big data set that they have pulled together. And they want our views on this data set. They want Colombia wants to know, how can we use this? What else is needed, etc. So without further ado, I'm going to ask first the panelists that are in the room, Joan and Benson, to please introduce yourselves. And then we'll go around online to introduce the online panelists, and we can thereafter begin the presentation from Professor Modi.
Great. Good morning, good afternoon, from wherever you're joining us. My name is Joan Chahenza. I'm Director, Energy Access Financial Advisory at AMDA. AMDA is a trade association that represents private sector grid developers in Sub-Saharan Africa. Sorry, there's a bit of an echo. Great. So far we've got 41 private sector companies across 15 countries, and we represent 86% of the market that is currently, powering over 500,000 households using 78,000 connections. And we're really happy to see that MiniGrids, of course, have gotten to a place where they're actually infrastructure, recognized as infrastructure assets that are being deployed in terms of electrifying rural households at least cost. And I'm really happy to be part of this conversation.
All right, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Soneri, and I lead the energy access work for World Resources Institute, or otherwise known as WRI Africa. Our energy access work is focused on stimulating demand for clean energy investment in the region. Currently, our work is spread across a number of countries, including Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Zambia, Nigeria, and still growing. And of course, we work very closely with policymakers, but I think more importantly, two areas of our work. One is that we have been building a geospatial tool. We are calling it the Energy Access Explorer, which provides data on energy demand and supply options, which I think is quite innovative compared to quite a number of other tools that are out there, which mainly focus on the supply side. Of course, we have seen emergence of other tools that are also providing demand side data. But yes, our tool provides data on energy supply and demand to help policymakers, investors be in a position to make informed decisions. Then the other component of our energy access work, which I think is also closely related to this, is that we've been working very closely with development organizations, working on the agriculture / livelihood sector, and helping especially smallholder farmers to be in a position to undertake informed analysis of energy demand assessment, and definitely integration of clean energy in their work across the value chain. So super excited to be part of this conversation and looking forward to making interventions. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Joan and Benson. So now we have a few panelists online. Just please give a brief summary of your work, but we have 7 or 8 people, so just try to keep it to 30 seconds or so. Gauri Singh, the Deputy Director General for the International Renewable Energy Agency is on the line. Gauri, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, and great to be on this panel. It's very exciting that we are looking at a segment of work that's of a lot of interest to IRENA. At IRENA, we do a lot of work on putting together the best practices and the policies that have worked across countries. And we have about 168 countries as our members. So obviously access is a very important agenda. And now the countries are asking us to get closer to the ground. So we are now in the midst of developing a strategy to start working with our focal points, which are Ministries of Energy and Agriculture, to start more work on the ground. So great to be on the panel.
Great, thank you so much, Gauri. Next, Hack Stjernblad from Sun Culture.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Great to be here. Hack Stjernblad, Sun Culture. We develop and commercialize solar power irrigation solutions for smallholder farmers. We are vertically integrated in Kenya, where we also offer financing, installation, after-sale service. of our hardware and software. And then we work in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Togo through distributor partnerships. So yeah, this is very exciting to see the result, and really looking forward to today's session.
Great. And then Engineer Paul Kasule Mukasa, could you say a few words just to introduce yourself, please? Hi, Paul, can you hear us? If you'd like to introduce yourself. I'll move to the next person just to keep the flow moving, and we'll come back to you, Paul. I see my colleague at EnerGrow, Tom Nangosia. Do you want to introduce yourself, Tom? Okay, panelists, please be ready to just give a brief introduction to yourself. I'm calling on everyone at the moment. So Federico from Equatorial Power, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you for the invitation, and good morning to everybody. I'm Federico Aleotti. I'm a design engineer at Equatorial Power, which is a mini-grid developer based in Kampala, Uganda. And at the moment, we have around 5,000 connections in mini-grids in Uganda, between Uganda, Rwanda, and Democratic Republic of the Congo. And we also have some operation in Tanzania, Kenya, and Ethiopia. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, Federico. If Paul or Tom is ready, please jump in. Okay, otherwise we can go to, I think, Michael Mina from CLASP is also on the line. Or perhaps not. Okay. Well, we're going to, I think we have many panelists, so we don't want to waste people's time. What we are preparing for now is a robust conversation around how productive uses can help hasten the rollout of renewable energy to achieve universal energy access with renewable energy, with a focus on renewable energy, of course. And I think that this set of panelists has decades and decades of experience on this topic, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But first, framing this conversation is going to be a presentation of a new, very, very insightful and very, very robust data set that Professor Vijay Modi will share with us right now. And he's going to really show us what we can do with big data and what big data is available to us. And the conversation afterwards is going to be around, okay, well, how useful is this? What else do we need? And how can we collaborate to create more big data sets that are useful for rolling out renewable energy across the continent? So Vijay, I'm passing it over to you. And let's, I think, just because we have such a big group, yeah, we'll try to keep it to around 20 minutes. And then we'll go jumping directly into some Q&A and some small presentations from other people about their work as well.
Thank you, Aaron. And I wanted to call from not use the mic, but he's with the Ministry of Local Government and very involved in the parish development model there.
Sorry, Vijay.
Someone
Vijay,
from CLASP,
apologies
Michael was here, but we'll bring him in later. So I wanted to first say that thank you for everyone to participate. The main, I think, difference I wanted to kind of emphasize today is we want to take an approach where as data is gathered, we want to share with the community. We don't want the data to be in some PDF file, in some report 3 years later. So we want it to be open. We want WRI to host it. We want others, anyone can host it. And we are making some progress or quite a bit of progress with the government of Uganda in making their own data sets open across agriculture, water, local government, and they've been very cooperative to come together because energy cannot happen by itself. And we are making some headway, and we will need, if you find all this interesting, we want to make headway towards keeping, a government able to also continuously gather. Is mic working? Can people hear me? Okay, fantastic.
Vijay,
so
I don't know what it is, but
so
there's something
I'm
with
going
the
to
mic.
first of all
there's lots
acknowledge
of
all
scratches
the
on the
different
mic.
players who have helped, and of course a lot of our students and teams. So there is a chat window there. If I don't know if that needs to be minimized, I will leave it to the, okay. Can people on the Zooms, is it obscured by the chat window? Okay,
No,
fine.
it's fine.
So today, the main topic, first of all, will show you data that was literally gathered in the last 3 months. And that's around, first of all, it's rural. It's not urban. I'm not saying urban is not important. I'm just saying what we gathered was rural. And we'll also show some brief sidebars of what we did in Ethiopia and Senegal on how some of this was found to be useful and is being used. And hopefully, we'll get some comments from the team here. So going straight to the rural setting, 10 years ago, when we started energy planning, we didn't even know where each home was. We know that now. So that's a huge advance in 10 years. Right? Large industry, large mining loads, we know where they are. If there are large clusters of loads, where there's vibrant economic activity, we know that. But we are now going, so to speak, closer to the last mile, and we don't know where the potential agro-processing, irrigation, which are motor loads, which are higher loads than just lighting or cell phone charging and so on. And I think the challenge is, unlike households where every household is a potential load, such are
Vijay,
not
the microphone
equally distributed across the landscape. And new value chains are also emerging. So to just give an example, we were surprised, and our colleagues in surprised that in the last, we don't exactly know where the agro-processing loads are. We do know where households are. Okay. So, and even our colleagues in Uganda were surprised at the growth and the occurrence of such loads. Okay. So how did we get started? I just want to say 3 years ago through UNCDF, they facilitated a conversation here, and they said, look, they would love to know where irrigation potential is growing, where value chains are leading to more productive use. Are the loads clustered? Is there diversity of loads? Is there seasonality that impacts utilization of a power source and so on? Equipment, as Aaron mentioned, that's not trivial, right? And maybe the future is it will have motor loads and mobility and e-cooking and other loads, and can this diversity help? And it's not just about mini grids. I think it can help the grid players, edge of the grid players, and so on. So in the spirit of this dialogue today, I'll just go to what kind of data I think is cost effective to gather. We'll come to this. Exhaustive enumeration is expensive. I think it's almost impossible. Nor is it possible to gather data that can meet the design requirement of a service provider. So a mini grid player may want to know exactly where to put each pole, wire, all that. That is still, I think, going to be a little bit further out. But what we can do, and we can do it with reasonable statistical confidence, is, so we did about 14 districts in Uganda where we did this work. So all the numbers all the data is from those 14 districts. That's about 1/10 of Uganda. And I think we are all here today that maybe through this conversation, you can help shape the remaining 90%, and maybe that should be done a little differently. So we went to 325 cells of 25 kilometers square each. Now I want to give a sense of that. That is roughly the size of a parish. Of course, parish sizes vary, and that's roughly representing 1,000 households. Okay, on average, each parish is on average 1,000 households. So you can say to some extent that this data represents what's going on for that 325,000 households. Of course, this would have to be multiplied 10, 20 times if you want to cover the 6-7 million rural households in Uganda. So I just want to give that sense. And so we needed enough interviews, enough observations to claim that what we are showing for that quote unquote cell, which is about the size of a parish, is representative. That included 4 farmer interviews, which are very detailed. Those are the expensive pieces of the data to gather. 12 to 16 plot level observations. These can be scaled up if we want more easily. They are cheaper to gather. They don't involve a conversation, but they get a lot of information. And then about 1 market center per cell. So 325 cells, we gathered about 400 market centers. So we'll show you what. Now, there's a challenge with the market centers is, whereas cropland, we know in advance where the cropland is, so you can rigorously sample that cropland. We didn't have a full exhaustive list of all the market centers to sample from. So I just want to say there is a little bit of a challenge there, okay? So, these are the places, just to be very specific, and we try to do it across a diversity of landscapes in Uganda. And if you see now the red box, Kasese, if I zoom in that box, we went to every red square that you see there and interviewed multiple or observed multiple plots, what's going on from a perspective of productive use, right? So any motor loads and all. So again, it's a sample. So having done that, we have kind of investigated the smaller squares that you see, which are about 1,150. And the total number of survey for this is therefore about 1,100 farmer interviews, about 6,000 or 7,000 plot observations, about 380 market centers. And if we had to scale this up, and we could, if we did the same thing, you see in the box what it would entail, okay? And this breakdown was to optimize cost, right? You want to not spend just surveying, you want to do stuff eventually. So what can we tell so far? Okay, we can tell where higher value crops are being grown. We can tell where, how, what, a crop is being irrigated. I can just tell you a punchline. It was really vegetables, and there is a significant growth in this high value horticulture that is taking place, probably domestic market as well as across the border market, but by maybe not, overseas market, right? Then so in each of these areas, what is driving the processing? I can tell you the punchline. Most of the processing was not being done electrically. Okay, so, and yet those places had access to the grid, right? So these are the kind of things. And of course, these vary from place to place. We are picking up, every month how the loads might vary. This is important perhaps to MiniGrid developers. We can tell what the co-location of households is. There's extensive data on all the households. So if we want to plan both together. Now, there's a program of the Ministry of Agriculture that requests that is asking people to apply for a subsidy for a solar or a fuel pump. And they have 24,000 such applications already in 40 districts in Uganda. We can tell where that intensity is occurring. Working closely with other ministries, we can tell which places are closer to bigger towns with all-weather roads, with grids, surface water, and again, all this, perhaps, WRI platforms also have similar things. So this is, by the way, I just want to again emphasize, we are not necessarily in the business of promoting our own platform. So the platform I'll show is just to show, hey, this is, make it easier to visualize it. But I think the key is to share it with the whole community. So this hope is we can inform the potential intensity of mechanization. Now, just some high touch points because of time is 72% of market centers did have utility wire present. And then we can tell what are the different kind of activities taking place there, and bulk of it is grinding, milling, but there are these other items that you see there. And I'll come to another. So of the markets that have access to electricity, only 53% is powered by electricity. So about half, and the other half is not. So that shows also an opportunity. And what's the other half? Of course, it varies across the places. You see some places very much petrol, diesel dominated, and some less so. So that's, and then these are the kind of things, if we get a chance, we can go to the dashboard. Otherwise, this quickly shows an easier way for policymakers, decision makers to visualize the information, right? Then we wanted to also get across, if people are using, if people are irrigating, what are they growing for it, right? Can that lead to value chains? And as you see, the vegetables column, and we of course have it down to the specific. So, tomatoes turns out probably the most dominant, but the vegetable category is the most prominent, except in some specific places, right? So there are some specific places where irrigation is also being done for other crops, right? Coffee, cassava, fruit in some places, but the bulk of it appeared to be this. And, this is just a visual representation of the same. If you look at the unirrigated plots in the same areas, they are more dominated by cereals and by root crops. So, by the way, we specifically did not focus on sugarcane. Sugarcane has its own unique sort of processing and a larger, right? So we also know whether the crop is for self-consumption or sale, how close is the person to surface water. And primarily this was to understand whether others who are not currently doing something could also start to do that, right? So we are interested, of course, in the aspect of the latent demand and working with the government, how close these are to the all-weather roads, grids, and so on. So just one such thing, one such data point is, so one is most of the irrigated crops is for sale. So 80% of it is for sale, unlike unirrigated crop, which is much less. And fair enough, right? That's where the next source of income will be. And water sources, much of it is surface water, even though shallow groundwater is emerging. So we can tell which of the, and by the way, while the data here is being shown at the district level, this data exists down to the individual interview and the individual quote unquote 25 square kilometer cell. It's just being shown here as aggregated at the district level. And to just clarify that we have not gone to every single person, so we don't know where every single person is, but we're trying to find what is representative of that 25 square kilometer cell. So we can see how far, for example, the distribution grid is to places where people are using motor loads. So And the next graph here is just showing where the darker color greens are where farmers have actually already, this is from a very recent program where, you know, they are going to subsidize through 50% or 40% the capex for the farmers, for pumps, for solar, for fuel. And you see where the darker greens are is where the requests are higher. That may be useful to private practitioners because that gives some idea of, this shows the seasonality of loads, right? That the seasonality, of course, of irrigation grows in the dry season of November to March, but that may be associated with some value chains, which in turn may affect seasonality of agro-processing as well. So the questions for this group, and I think I want to wrap up as soon as possible, and then if we have, I would love to show the live dashboard as well, perhaps, but these are the questions for the group. In addition to, of course, other, you know, data alone isn't going to do it. You need finance, you need, you know, maybe country policies around agronomy to promote, you know, specific value chains. Many countries in Asia also did heavy focus on the combination of crop, water, fertilizer, finance, energy, right? So it's not by energy alone. I just want to emphasize that. Okay, so I'll stop there. But if I can, and let me see if it works, it depends on the internet connection. Let me see if I can just briefly, and we can of course share all this. So I'm going to stop sharing, but I'm going to share again the live dashboard, so to speak, where we hope to keep adding data, right? So you know, so if we are interested in the administrative polygons, you know, I'm going to just put here. So for example, we can go down to the parish level. It will take some time to populate. And and that's for Uganda. So I want to highlight a couple of other things. While we are populating that, so here it is, and you can then, any specific quote unquote indicator, right? You know, what is, for example, the percent irrigated manually across those 14 districts, then that can pop up, right? And so can some pre-existing layers. But what I wanted to take you to is a slightly different. So I'm going to move from Uganda for just a minute, that what can be done in a large, so it's not the entire Ethiopia, but if you took Amhara in 2020, and we are able to tell right down to a quarter hectare. So this is right down to a quarter hectare who is actually irrigating in this landscape. And why is the government finding this useful? They can use this to identify large clusters, perhaps not an isolated farmer. They can identify large clusters, medium clusters of 10, 50, 100 such farmers who are engaged in a certain activity. The techniques used here allow you to see year-to-year variation as well. So that was 2020, and you know, this is 2021, for example, and you do see differences and so on. So I think I just want to give and highlight that it is also possible. It is also possible to combine this ground data with other satellite imagery. Satellite imagery cannot detect everything. It can detect buildings. it can detect crops, it can hopefully detect irrigation, but it can't detect easily agro-processing centers. So there are some limitations there, right? So that's and maybe the last bit, I had promised to show something around. 1 second. I went to the wrong. Yeah, here it is. So I just want to show you what, how this project was used. This kind of work was used before in Senegal, right? To find these clusters of farmers, and then working through private sector and banks, they were able to have a common shared system as long as they were proximate to each other to increase utilization of solar. If you don't utilize it, you are kind of wasting a resource. So just that gives a little bit of an idea. And of course, I want to mention that it's not energy alone. It needed, they shifted from millets to onions, it needed a market, it needed. So potential value also is that can we detect clustering, and is clustering helpful, and clustering of small and large loads. So I will, Aaron, stop there. I will stop there. I'm just trying to close this. Okay, yeah, I'll stop there, Aaron, and hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Vijay. I hope you guys can hear me still.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think that this data set was extremely fascinating, and I think I saw Hack Sternblad's eyes light up when all this irrigation and interest in irrigation information was popping up. So it's clearly already relevant to some of our panelists. And now really the question is, what else do we need? I could talk with all of you for hours about this, but I'm moderating, so I'm going to be asking our panelists instead to get started on this. And I'm gonna start with Gauri, because IRENA is another institution, as Gauri mentioned, really has a huge focus on providing information, guidance, policy recommendations, and analysis on what is happening in the renewable energy space around the world. And maybe Gauri, maybe you want to just comment a little bit about what you've seen now, and do you feel that it's relevant for the work of IRENA? Does IRENA also have teams working on productive uses where this information might be useful? And maybe what do you see in addition to what was presented that might be helpful for IRENA's work and for the rollout of renewable energy more broadly?
Thanks, Aaron. And I think this was really a very fascinating presentation. And thank you, Professor, for having me in this webinar to see the work that's happening. Now, as I mentioned before, at IRENA, mostly in the last decade, our mandate had been around promoting and supporting countries to move in the direction of getting more renewable energy into their systems, their grids, and to also focus on the decentralized applications. But now we are seeing a huge amount of interest that countries have in wanting to create policy structures that would support productive use of energy, and especially the water energy nexus, and also the nexus with agriculture and supporting greater productivity. So I think for us, as we start working with countries to design systems where support can be provided to the end users, whether in form of a loan that comes at a lower rate of interest, or some kind of risk capital, it becomes very important for us to go back to the donors or the countries that want to support this with data sets like this. because there is of course a way that you can get information from the country doing other methodologies, but I think this actually provides a very solid base for getting the potential donors and the policymakers to work together to actually support making systems that would increase the increase number of systems, renewable energy systems in the field. So our concern is, and I think in a way, Professor Modi also through his presentation answered one of the concerns that I had, is how statistically relevant is the kind of data set that's being presented. And I think if 1/10 of Uganda is being covered, I think it's definitely something that policymakers can build on. One of the questions, of course, I had is that given this exercise, how is it possible to templatize it so that if we want to work with the Columbia University to take it to other countries, and also involve development banks in this exercise, because they need to also have an ownership on data, just like what Professor said, that it's a data set that has the ownership of community. But I think just getting in a larger group to own and understand the data that's coming in would help actually design any policy and also make the implementation smoother. So that's my very quick take on this, Aaron.
Great, thank you so much, Gauri. Those are really, really relevant points. And I think that, one of the points you made just now about 10% being something that we can use to build on, I think is a very important point. One of the things that I complained about quite often is the fact that we talk a lot in the energy access space about innovative finance and innovative business models. And my fear is always that this pushes the responsibility into the future. We need to be innovating all the time. So we don't act now. We wait until we have those innovative things. And I think that what Professor, what Vijay has just presented to us, it really shows us how we can already be taking action today. And really learning today and moving forward with this information. We don't have to wait until we have the rest of the 90%. We can get moving now and build out the rest of that 90% as we go. So thank you for that. Why don't we have the panelists, Joan and Benson, who are sitting there with Mr. Modi, offer their reflections. You can just go one after the other, and then we'll go around to the panelists online after that.
Lovely. I think, yes, now I am audible. I'd like to start by thanking Professor for, of course, the presentation. Very insightful, outcome from, of course, even the dashboard, really amazing the work that you've done. So I'd like to start off by just talking about and really taking a step back and painting a picture from a macro screen and really bringing in the nexus between energy and agriculture. And I'd like to talk about, of course, AMDA's work within the data and research space. And having said this, I will talk about a few, outcomes from the Benchmarking Africa report, which we'll be releasing in the next couple of months. And my thoughts will really center around, productive use, of course, and growing demand, which is really the core of the conversation that we're having today. So, obviously, increasing consumer demand for electricity, of course, is important, and especially for the mini-grid developers, because you get to spread out your fixed costs and central operation costs over a larger platform. And what we are seeing from the market is that the average consumption, right, is averaging around 6.2 kilowatt hour. And that is very little. I mean, some of us spend those 6 units, in one day in our houses, if you're keen enough to see what your consumption is at home. So there's still much more that needs to be done to ensure that these rural households are reaching a place where they have the modern minimum, average, which is around 120 kilowatt hour monthly consumption. That is really still little, but that's really the modern minimum. So I'd like to say that, from our data, we are seeing that low consumption use. So from our data set, we are seeing that low consumption users accounted for around 70% of the MiniGrid customer base. So this is really worrisome, and we need to make sure that we are, of course, putting in place demand stimulation programs. And I like the fact that this data is really, bringing the case for more of these demand stimulation providers. And this 70% of the MiniGrid consumer base actually, spend less than 4 kilowatt hour per month, right? So the average is at 6.2, but 70% of these spend, less than 4 kilowatt hour per month. So I'd like to say that, of course, growing anchor loads improves the long-term sustainability of mini-grids. And we are really excited, of course, to see the likes of, the demand stimulation programs that are, and providers that are currently there. We are happy to see the work that, EnerGrow does, AgSol, Inspira Farms, SureChill, and the other demand stimulation providers who are, who've joined this forum. So I'd like to end by saying that most productive use, of course, has been project related. And what we have seen donors funding, has really been limited to geographies and technologies, right? So we are still running small pilots here, small pilots there, which is really hindering the collation of multi-country evidence, right? So we are continuing to, be hopeful that we'll actually step into a place where we can actually draw lessons from different jurisdictions and scale up the productive use efforts and see, how we can learn from different markets. So definitely data is important to scale up these initiatives. And we're really excited to be part of this conversation, and we look forward to the thought leadership. Thank you.
Great. All right. So for the interest of the ones who've just joined us now, after we did the introductions, my name is Soneri, and I work for the World Resources Institute. I lead the energy access work for WRI in Africa. I think for me, for this conversation was music to my ears, in the sense that we have also been developing a similar tool. We are calling it the Energy Access Explorer, which also seeks to provide data on energy demand and supply, with the whole essence, of course, seeing how we can be able to stimulate consumption or demand for clean energy. I think first and foremost is to appreciate the challenges that, Professor, you've laid out in terms of building this kind of a tool. Access to data, I think, is one challenging aspect. And so if we would want to inform policy or investment in as far as clean energy investment is concerned, certainly providing access to or easy access to reliable data is a key step in the right direction. Of course, comes with significant challenges. So appreciating all the work that Professor has gone into that. And of course, I think the other challenge that you also laid out is how do we scale up this kind of a tool? Because considering the amount of energy, effort, investment that has gone into this kind of a tool at this level, we need to have this at the macro level. And I think scaling that becomes a challenge that, of course, that we have also been trying to see how can we be able to promote this kind of a tool. But also more important, and getting a bit more specific into probably additional data that could also be able to help this. And appreciating what, Professor, you mentioned, that energy alone and the data on energy alone is not sufficient. We certainly need additional other data, and perhaps I think I can be able to focus a bit more on some of the other data that we have realized could be able to help in terms of stimulating this kind of a conversation. So of course, one, you presented very good data on market, but I think the other thing that we've also realized is for investors, they would also want to see, for instance, the distance between these opportunities or the productive use opportunities, where exactly they are, and the distance to the available market. And even more important, which I think is also another challenge, is, can we be able to be a bit more specific on the size of the market that we're actually mentioning about? Because I think providing general data on market, we've realized is not sufficient enough for people who would actually want to understand what size of a market are we speaking about, so that then they can be, yes, which definitely, that again also brings its own challenge. I think but being in a position to provide the geolocation and the size of those specific markets, I think would be very important. The other thing also is access to those markets from the farm or from the productive use opportunity is also another thing, which brings in a question about road networks, for example. So can you be in a position to provide data on the transport infrastructure and the road networks? And even more important, I think, if possible, again, disaggregating between, for example, all-weather roads, for instance, basically the status of the road, I think would be very important for investors who would also want to be able to make use of that kind of information to inform their decisions in terms of investment. I think the other thing, and I'm not too sure whether I missed it, is if we could be in a position to provide data on the different energy resources that are available. And of course, I know most of this is easily available, but mainly for purpose of analysis or multi-criteria analysis, so that anybody who would then want to see, for example, in this location, what kind of or what potential sources of renewable energy are we speaking about? I think that would also be extremely helpful. And also linking with the discussion around financing, I think we've also realized a majority of even, say, DFIs that would want to collaborate with different institutions, I think identifying financial institutions that are actually within those locations would be extremely helpful. And so that also brings in another conversation. We cannot provide general information or data, for example, financial institutions, but if we can be able to go a bit higher and provide, for instance, commercial banks, microfinance institutions, because again, you realize these play different roles and they have different advantages in as far as the end users are concerned. And one final thing that I would want also to bring up here, I think, is a whole discussion around e-mobility. So increasingly, I think everybody has been speaking about e-mobility in the context of urban settings. But I think when we are speaking about productive use, and more importantly, appreciating the role, for example, for three-wheelers in this region, or even two-wheeler, and the opportunity for that as well in terms of promoting sustainable transport in the agricultural sector, I think would also be very important. So providing probably data on where, which I think also is partly a challenge, but I think for purposes of this discussion, that's what we need to be having a conversation around, is can we be able to even provide data on the current demand for three-wheeler, two-wheeler in some of these locations? Because in a way that could also be able to provide sort of insight to potential investors in the e-mobility sector where they can be able to take advantage of. And finally, I want to echo what I think Gori mentioned. Two things. So one is the targeted institutions that we want to make use of this data. I think it's very important to make sure that they actually also own this kind of data from the onset, because then we stand the risk of coming up with very important tools. But then when it gets where it's supposed to inform policy decisions, then the stakeholders, probably they have questions in terms of this data. So I think also sensitizing them from the word go becomes important. But then number two, and linked to the same, is purely just a question of capacity building for these stakeholders. I think that becomes very important, because one of the things that we've realized is you come up with a very nice tool, very loaded tool in terms of data that for sure can be able to inform decision making. But then in terms of the end user, the targeted tool to inform their decision making, they do not have that capacity. So I think also looking at how can we be able now to go beyond building the tool to actually building the capacity of the targeted end users to inform their decision making becomes critical. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Benson and Joan. Really, really insightful points. I think, so BJ, you and I and Benson's colleague, Rebecca Shirley, had a meeting a few months ago thinking about combining some of the existing data sets. This data set that was just presented is of course focused on agriculture, and there are other data sets. So the WRI data set is out there. There's an energy, there's one from TFE, the VIDA tool as well. And there's one from the Energy Catalyst. And I've forgotten the name of that one, but most of these, not all of them, but most of them are open source. So actually we could easily add them to this data set that was just presented. I want to give the professor a chance to respond to some of this after we've gone through an initial round, just because I think we have many panelists that want to give their comments and talk a little bit about their work. So Vijay, if you don't mind, instead of responding to each of the suggestions in turn, why don't we collect some comments and hear from some more companies working on these important issues. So I see Hak there with his video on. Why don't you go first from the online team, and then we can make a round. Just please, standard operating procedure, try to keep your comments short because we have such a big group. But yeah, please, we're really keen to hear what Sun Culture thought of this presentation.
Thanks, Aaron, and yeah, thanks for the presentation and for the great data and great work that's been collected here. It's very, very, very insightful. It's really very spot on, as Aaron mentioned before, what we are looking for as a solar irrigation company for smallholder farmers. And for those who missed me, I'm Hak Stjernblad, Director of Business Development at Sun Culture, and who develop and commercialize solar power irrigation solutions for smallholder farmers. Yeah, so not too many comments. I'm kind of like playing around here a bit with the tool and seeing the different layers, but super interesting. One comment, obviously, which Aaron mentioned before, with the different data sets, and I think one map that from the irrigation perspective has been very interesting for us is the International Water Management Institute's irrigation suitability data, which I think is a really interesting data set, looking at the different water tables as well, especially also when it comes to the, if you want to look more on the electric side, what will be the load need? You have to look a bit on the how deep down is the water as well for the non-surface water sources, and they have got really good data there, looking at what are the different water tables. Would of course add quite a little bit of a complexity, but I think that's an interesting one. Other than that, of course, I think also on the interviews, I'm not sure if it's in here somewhere, but I guess, of course, there was a lot of questions being asked, but also what is the willingness to invest, or what is the willingness to invest into irrigation? What's the willingness to expand your farm? And talk a little bit more about what do they see the future? So also to further gauge what is the potential. So I think for us as Sun Culture, we look of course at the diesel pump replacement, which is one way, but the larger majority actually of our customers is farmers who move from rain-fed irrigation to irrigated irrigation. So moving from the staple maize, etc. crops into the high value vegetable crops. So yeah, looking at the willingness to move between these is something that's super interesting for us. But yeah, I will keep it short. Really nice and really useful information, and I can't wait to dig further into it, and also for the other countries. Thank you.
Great, thanks Hak. Federico from Equatorial Power, would you like to go next and comment a little bit on this? I know that Equatorial Power is working with some productive use service providers already. Maybe you want to share a little bit about your experience.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Professor, for the presentation, and to all the panelists. So Equatorial Power is a mini-grid developer that based its business model on agro-processing and productive use of energy. So as I mentioned, at the moment, we have several mini-grids in Uganda, Rwanda, and DRC. So yeah, data collection is a big issue. So is a big challenge for us. What we do at the moment, we combine information from geospatial data that is available online. There are several open access platforms. Some of them have been mentioned. And then we integrate that with surveys on the ground. And that is, as I said, a big challenge, because most of the time we need to validate the data with qualitative and quantitative analysis, and sometimes it's quite challenging to understand what's the solidity of the analysis that we produce. So for sure, I see a lot of potential in this kind of tools, in understanding if what we see from the geospatial data is then that later matches with what we observe on the ground. I would like maybe to touch base on a few points that were mentioned here. At the moment, of course, like anchor load is very helpful for MiniGrid developers in order to increase the revenues and make sure that the project is viable financially. And what we do at the moment, we analyze the existing loads. So diesel replacement is something that we look forward to. But also we try to estimate the potential of new agro-processing activities. So something that is not being done at the moment that could be done. On this, we work with companies like EnerGrow. We try to stimulate the local entrepreneurs to access to new appliances. So in this way, we don't want to distort the market too much. But in some cases, we also invest in our productive machineries. We have, for example, ice making machines, fish dryers, water potabilization processes for large scale users. On this side, there's a few layers that are really important for us. For example, I saw crop types. This is really helpful. And also I would add maybe presence of cattle. That's a huge potential for what regards the milk value chain and pasteurization and the cold chain. And then, of course, what is really important for us is to understand which are the services that are already provided. So which are the activities going on in the trading centers. And this is something that I know is difficult to understand from satellite images, for example, but it's very helpful for us to understand exactly what is already being done, maybe not locally, but a few kilometers far, and with which energy sources. Because we know that we can compete, for example, with diesel, but not with national grid, for example. So that is really, really important. Another point is regarding e-mobility and mobility of people on the ground. This is really key for us. We are one of the MiniGrid developers that are integrating e-mobility in our business model. We have experience with motorbikes and with electric outboards in Uganda. We're going to also release some of our learnings in this field to accelerate the decarbonization of the process. And a number of boats and where these boats goes and how many motorbikes are operating in a region is something that we can assess from surveys, but it would be really good to also have that kind of information from geospatial data. And also regarding this point of mobility, I know we're not discussing about consumption of households and local businesses, but this is something very, very helpful because, for example, we see that in some mini grids, the number of people that spend time on site depends on the crops, on the farming activities, for example, on the fishing activities, and getting to know how many people are on the site and the seasonality of the value chains has a huge impact on the household consumption because it is correlated to the amount of people that are actually on site consuming, switching on the bulbs at night, and so on. So this is one big contribution that geospatial can give on the mobility. Yeah, I think these are the main points. I have other points, but have already been touched. So I would give it back to you, Aaron.
Great, thanks, Federico. We have a lot of people on the call. I just wanted to, before passing over to other panelists or other attendees to ask some questions, I wanted to make just a quick comment about our work at EnerGrow, because I think what we've seen on this panel, and Federico mentioned a little bit about the results, but the question is really, okay, well, if we have all this data, how much of an impact does it actually have to work on productive uses in communities? One of the challenges is, as Federico mentioned, we need anchor loads in the mini-grid sector, but at the end of the day, around 80 to 85% of all mini-grid connections across the entire continent and all utility connections across the entire continent, they're actually not productive. They're households and they're small loads. And one of the challenges is we really need to, when looking at agricultural data in particular, to recognize that we have the opportunity to really change that quite dramatically, because across the continent, millions and millions and millions of households are agriculturalists. And through agro-processing, through irrigation, through other sorts of cold storage, etc., we have the opportunity to dramatically increase the number and the percentage of productive loads, which could really redefine the economics of rural electrification if we do it right. And EnerGrow is trying to be a partner to the sector to accomplish this objective. And what we have seen, we are not actually working on agro-processing yet. So the data that I'm about to tell you is about carpentry equipment, refrigeration equipment, welding equipment, cooking equipment, but we haven't gotten into the agro-processing, because one thing that we can also talk about here is that this is seasonal and difficult, right? Agricultural education and training and seasonalities and pests and other disasters make it a very challenging area to work in. But just a quick couple of notes from EnerGrow's experience. Our customers on average, after 6 months of working with EnerGrow, they consume the same amount of electricity that the average Ugandan would consume after 6 years of having an energy connection organically. So our intervention is speeding up the load growth curve really dramatically across our customers. And they're increasing their income by about 70%. And we expect, with the introduction of agro-processing, which we are starting this year, that many farmers will increase their income by more than 100%, simply because of the value addition, the dramatic value addition that agro-processing offers to farmers. We've had a lot of success. The business model is working. And what I'm basically saying is that, putting what Professor Modi and what we've all just talked about into action really should have a dramatic impact, both on the lives and livelihoods of the people that we are talking about, but also the energy companies. And it really will take a new economics of rural electrification to see the mini-grid sector take off. And this is coming from someone who, loves mini-grids, but, business as usual is not going to allow us to scale from 10 sites to 1,000 sites. We really have to improve loads. And I think that this conversation that we're having is therefore of utmost importance. We really must, I think, as a community, continue to drive work on this topic forward, because without dramatic improvements in the load, it will be very, very hard to move money very quickly and to see the dramatic scale up that we need to solve the energy access challenge. So thanks for those initial comments and for listening to mine. And now I'd like to open it up to some Q&A. And then we can give the floor back to Professor Modi after some Q&A with the remaining participants also who are in the room. We cannot really see online the participants in the room, but maybe we can pass the microphone around to folks in the room, and then we can come back to any attendees online who would like to have comments as well. So is there a microphone? The participants there?
Aaron, I have the pleasure of helping you in terms of moderating the Q&A for the physical event. So I'd like to, I know we've said a lot, you've been amazing participants, you've listened to us, but now I'm opening up, the floor for a bit of interaction. And I look forward to the conversation that we will have. So I'd like anyone who has a question in the room, please feel free to, and I'm going to pass the mic to you. Oh, great, lovely.
Hello.
So if you could please say your name, institution, then who you're addressing the comment or question to.
All right. Yeah. So my name is Michael Maina, and I work with CLASP. I support research in the clean energy access portfolio. And sorry. And this is very fascinating. I feel like I've just fought. But really, I think this is very, very useful for me. At CLASP is an organization promoting efficient appliances for people and the planet. Well, when we talk about energy access, we talk about the services that the energy is going to provide. And these services are provided technologies by the appliances that we promote. And just picking up on what I said, that, well, over 70% of people in Sub-Saharan Africa are involved in one way or the other in agriculture or in some form of agriculture. And for us, just to mention, we have been trying to use novel approaches like this, thinking of ways to collect data at scale. Africa has been known to be data poor, changing with all this from WRI, from NITHIO and all the rest. And I think what would be, at least for me, it would be something, this information that we are generating is a business intelligence, something that can be used by decision makers, by financiers. And I know in one of the, I think one of the caveats I saw was, well, it's almost impossible to kind of geolocate an individual farmer. Well, we tried doing that using satellite imagery and being able to be just using machine learning to kind of geotag an individual farmer, that this farmer is using irrigation. But our goal was really to try and understand what is the productivity of this individual farmer, what is the expected yield on the crop that they're growing. And with this kind of information, we expect that, well, this is information that can be used by financial institutions, because we, if I may mention, and I know I have a short amount of time, but we are designing a program for the IKEA Foundation to try and promote or to try and improve the livelihoods of smallholder farmers in Kenya, using productive uses of renewable technologies. And one of the challenges we come across talking to financial institutions and distributors, manufacturers, is that, the challenge with, smallholder farmers is there's a clear lack of, information on their ability to pay. Their ability, or well, willingness is something else, but the ability to pay. There is that lack of, risk, the risk associated with financing somebody who wants to own a solar irrigation. This is always left to people like Sun Culture. They are manufacturers, but they have to sell debt at the end of the day. So just thinking of what kind of, what kind of additional layers we can have on such a platform that can help in, it's kind of a fast level, like a fast, cookie cutter to say, well, that this is information that as a financial institution that I can use to say, well, that this individual farmer has passed this first level, and we can go further to a next step of looking at the different kind of financial or products that we can tailor for them. So.
Thank you so much, Michael. Those are amazing comments, and I believe there's a question that you've concluded your comments with. So I'll invite the next participant to please ask a question before maybe I move it to Aaron, so that we get to hear from also the online participants. Yes, please proceed.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Yemi, Cross-Country Innovation Lab. We work with developers to improve the business model. And one of the ways we do that is by testing productive use deployment on MiniGrid sites through appliance financing. The question I have is, I guess mostly for Federico and maybe for Professor Modi as well. But there was a conversation around e-mobility. And one thing that we've been thinking about is how do we sort of collect data on e-mobility, considering by nature these are mobile assets, right? So you might have a customer at a MiniGrid site who travels with their e-bike between communities. So how are we thinking about accurately collecting data on, the e-mobility and the impact of e-mobility when by nature the assets move around from place to place?
Okay, maybe I can start with my my feedback on
Thank
this.
you for your question. Yemi, any other comment, question? That table, please. If you can please pass the mic to that table. Oh, no? Okay. There are 3 hands raised, I'm seeing. So, so let's start with the gentleman.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is John Obiero. I work with the University of Nairobi, Faculty of Engineering, and my department is Environmental and Biosystems Engineering. My training basically is an agriculture engineer and specializing in soil and water engineering, which of course, including of course renewable energy sources. Now, let me thank Prof for the good presentation and of course his colleague on the kind of data that they are managing to collect using the tool for decision making. Data is very important for decision making purposes. Now, I just have 1 or 2 straightforward questions. Listening to the kind of data that is being collected, what didn't seem to be coming out for me, especially with regard to the use of renewable energy resources, which is really the focus, is what would, for example, be the potential for energy use in maybe the given cells that you're talking about. We're talking about maybe putting up solar panels for use in irrigation and what have you. Do we also, do some analysis to establish the potential for that energy use in a particular farm? Secondly, we're talking about we're also collecting data on the kind of agricultural practices that are being carried out by the farmers, what kind of crops and things like that. But just as a colleague was trying to ask a similar question, is in terms of best practices, how do these practices compare with what would best be used for that particular land? You could have a farmer probably growing maize or potatoes in an area. Do we promote that, or do we say for this particular area there is that, this is best placed to perform in this particular area depending on the climatic conditions, soils, and things like that. Then talked about data also on water availability. Maybe we just need clarification with regard to water availability, for example, for irrigation, because if you have surface water sources, be it rivers or dams or whatever, there's the complete uses for water, for maybe water supply, industrial use, and all that. What then can we say is available for irrigation? Was that also taken into account? I think those are my few questions. Thank you very much.
So, Aaron, I can start from the beginning, from the questions, starting with the online, and then coming to the ones that were brought up here, if that's okay.
Yes.
So, okay, so I think one of the first questions brought up by Irena was the question of templatizing, and I think that's pretty important. And why I say that is that, multiple players are involved in answering a lot of these questions. Not one player will answer all of them, but the space of energy, productive use, perhaps even financing can be gathered in a common standardized form Now, why did I skip a couple of things there? One, for example, water. So if you go to the dashboard in Ethiopia, the water depth is already recorded and is on the map. Right? So in Uganda, actually, as of all countries, has done the most thorough work on understanding where shallow wells, boreholes, and surface water is. And I think there, the issue is sort of working across multiple agencies, multiple players, to bring them on board so they see the value of productive use to them, and the productive use mini-grid sector see the value of what they have. So I wanted to say that now in terms of agriculture question, I also want to say that there are a lot of people in the agriculture departments, ministries, universities, think tanks, NGOs, who have very good idea of what, where, in terms of agronomy based on soils, precipitation, all that. So I think what I was trying to say there is that my at least reaction is perhaps whatever is being done by other community with their depth of expertise, let's bring that out to the table, to the fore. Otherwise, the task of gathering all in one place will become somewhat difficult. I wanted to come to the supply side that was brought up a few times. So there are parallel efforts that have gone on for renewable energy atlas across multiple countries. So Uganda just finished one like 3 months ago for solar. So solar across Uganda, and I am certain similar things exist in Kenya as well. Okay. So I think there has been actually quite a bit of effort. Now, what I was surprised, and it did not come up in the conversation, is the following. So the one observation we found in practice in implementing some of the ideas was that if we can supply energy from a solar resource while minimizing storage, because while we call it a solar system, the disproportional cost is actually for storage, for batteries. So if we can find a way to minimize that, and data can perhaps help there, and this links up to several of you brought up e-mobility. So the nice thing is that the two-wheeler or three-wheeler has its own storage. So a combination of diverse loads, some are perhaps from e-mobility, some from agro-processing, some from other productive loads, some perhaps even from cooking in the daytime, can enable a greater use of the solar resource across the times. So I just wanted to maybe I'll just say it in words, but this we found farmers doing this on their own in Senegal, sharing across a large group and thus enhancing utilization. So I think now there was a question asked about e-mobility and the data. I think that's a fantastic question. And I think, so let me address that here in the following way. This particular project, and we have here my colleagues from Colombia who have helped raise the money for some of this work, is to take existing research methods and put it into practice. And I think we will get to 100% in Uganda, and in a way that perhaps a energy planning effort across the country takes, but without such data. So I think we can be cost effective if we are standardized in the way of gathering. But what I wanted to say is, as far as e-mobility is a fantastic question, where should one put charging centers, right, for two-wheelers and three-wheelers? And this is I think a research question. We have already funds from Rockefeller Foundation to do research through through collecting perhaps primary data as well. We can talk offline. I think we will have to use maybe not satellite imagery, but perhaps even some sort of traffic cameras and their feeds to understand where, let's say, two-wheelers are coming from and so on. An interesting observation in Uganda is that many of the boda owners or operators or the drivers actually don't live in the core city, they live outside. So how can they figure out a way to charge this electric vehicle? So that's, and I'm looking at the other notes I took, there were several questions around financing. And I think, I think it's a very critical question. How to understand willingness to pay quickly from a farmer is not easy, okay, but we are trying to use other indicators that show that there is willingness to pay without actually asking a detailed set of questions. Maybe that can be done. And what was, I just took some more notes. So I think lowering the supply cost by minimizing storage, I think can be a key driver for productive use to lower the cost of the mini-grid supply. And the reason I bring it up is, unlike household loads where lighting and cell phone charging are displacing something that was even more expensive, whether kerosene or so on, here the productive use person must compete in a market to sell their product competitively. So if their cost of energy is, let's say, 80 cents a kilowatt hour, it becomes hard for them to compete. So I think perhaps, so then I'll finish by the last point that actually Benson had a long list, but Benson, I think you made a key point is, can we get the size of the cluster? Can we get this number of loads in the centers? And I am very much taking note of that. And maybe that can be done without adding a hugely more cost. So instead of having 5 farmer interviews, we do 3 farmer interviews and spend more resources on the agro processing center and saying, okay, there is also this load, this load, this load, and give you a size of that. So I think that can be practically implemented. I'm sure I have a lot more notes, but I want to be brief in case there's a second round of questions.
Can you hear us online?
This is fascinating for me. So over to you, Aaron or John.
Aaron, I'll hand it back to you for you to take the questions on the online platform. Then we can come back and finish up with the 2 questions or comments that were still not addressed.
Great. Thanks so much, Joan. Yeah, really interesting conversation. Yemi from Cross Boundary had addressed a question to Federico on e-mobility. So I'm just going to pass the mic to Federico.
Yes, thanks. Just a few points in addition to what Professor Moria said. Yes, I see a big potential for understanding where to place the charging station. So understand where are the motorbike stations. For example, I mentioned that Equatorial Power is addressing at the moment motorbikes and also electric boats on the islands we work in Lake Victoria, and understanding where are the landing sites and also how many boats are present on the shores and what's the effect on seasonality. That's a huge help on our side. And I also wanted to mention the fact that of course, we're interested in having an input from the geospatial data, but this doesn't mean that we don't have to do the work on the ground and integrate these analyses with the data collection on site. Because from my experience, you can have a very detailed analysis looking at satellite images, but once you go on the ground, many things change, and you can understand that only when you actually go there and talk to people, understand how they think, and so there are many cultural aspects that needs to be addressed. So this is a general comment. I see that there is still need of MiniGrid developers and companies who want to invest money in communities to go there and do some kind of due diligence on their cultural and socioeconomic behavior. Yeah, I think that's my comment, Aaron. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Aaron, I wanted to address one. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I did want to address one question that came up and I think it's an important question, was capacity building of the stakeholders. And I think that many data efforts, and I hope this one doesn't fall in the same hole, is they become one-time efforts. So I see that a lot of the work we are doing is trying to convince the government actors, when they are borrowing money for loans, to put aside maybe even 1% of that to put into creating sort of capacity to both collect on an ongoing basis such data. I think philanthropic efforts might become one-off and fall off the radar. So, and that goes with capacity building within the government departments to manage this. And I think this remains, I think, the next frontier. It has been tried before, not very successfully, but times are changing, and we see a lot more receptivity to this now than we saw 10 years ago. So I think that's I just wanted to add that.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions on the online platform?
I don't think so. If any of the participants would like to ask a question, you're free to do so. It would be helpful to use the raise my hand function online, but you can also just jump in. Otherwise, in the meantime, Joan, why don't you pass the mic to the participants there who had questions?
Yes, so I'll start with, I saw two hands somewhere. I'll start with the lady. Then which other question was there? And okay, so we start with the lady.
Hello, my name is Pauline Gidugo. Nice to see you, Aaron, online. My question is simply this. We've seen the growth of the off-grid sector, primarily the solar home systems, through demand. So it's come more from the demand than the supply. And sometimes I think that the missing link with the productive use is demand rather than supply. And I actually am quite convicted that if it came from a demand side, then we'd see much more traction. And that is also to say that even when we talk about loads, the people must want to have this equipment. They must want to have the mini-grids, rather than there's a great idea, mini-grids are a great idea, but they're sort of being shoved down, the throats of the users. So, I mean, that's been my conviction. And I think we've seen a lot of it. And we've seen that there hasn't been too much traction with mini-grids compared to how we saw an exponential growth with solar home systems. So I just wanted to hear your comment about that.
I would be interested in commenting on that.
I think Aaron's trying to say something.
Yeah, so thanks, Pauline. I think one of the major reasons why we saw exponential growth in the solar home system space is because of the microfinance element of that sector. So it is pay as you go. EnerGrow is by offering productive uses on a microfinance basis, which is basically kind of like productive use as you go. So we cannot switch off the productive use appliances, all of them, but we are actually working with some companies that are developing switches for electronic appliances and tools that might enable us to do that in the future. However, we do not actually want to have everything redesigned for a pay-as-you-go market. We don't think that that's necessary. And what the major difference is, Pauline, from my perspective, is really that ability to pay. So if you're a carpenter, electrical carpentry equipment is hundreds of USD. You can't afford that without a financing plan in most rural settings. And that is what we are offering. That is the difference. And indeed, Cross Boundaries Innovation Lab, Yemi there from Cross Boundary may know a little bit more about the details of these papers, but you know, for the past 4 years, Cross Boundary has been running productive use trials to better understand, you know, how productive uses are used and how they affect the grid. But one of the big things is that financing is a major barrier and a major opportunity. So I think that is one of the answers, but it's not the only answer. But I just want to jump in on that question.
So can I go ahead with this one? My name is Acacia Leakey. I'm from the Turkana Basin Institute. And yeah, as the name suggests, we work up north in both Turkana and Marsabit counties. And I think something that would be really interesting is to see more data collected for these arid areas, especially because I think the impact of climate change there is really becoming quite extreme, like with the drought that we are hopefully coming to the end of now. And I think that, as Aaron's mentioned, things like the welding, carpentry, that can diversifying away from things that are dependent on rainfall or other ecosystem services, it's sort of adds resilience to the rural economy. And I think that's really important. And then also in addition, sort of related, is where we're looking at agriculture, also looking at livestock. And I think that's already been mentioned. And it is challenging in addition to just the cultivation of crops and things like that. So yeah, the data for those diverse different places would be very interesting to see as well. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for the comment on livestock. And this also came up in Ethiopia as well, which is very much also has livestock, and also for, they brought up dry lands quite a bit. Right, so I think you bring up both the points. Indeed, we will try to at least see if there's any emerging livestock-based activity that's occurring. I wanted to come back also to, was it Pauline, your question of demand, and I think it's a spot-on question to me. So I'm not an agriculture expert, but I've worked with people who are agriculture experts. And in a kind of jest, I asked them, did the chicken come first or the egg, so to speak? One being the demand. And they said in agriculture, pretty much it was the demand for the product, ensuring the market for the product, ensuring that there was a price available to the farmer or for dairy or livestock. Having that was really the leading edge. Right. And then we did observe this in Senegal, that when we did our initial work, it took that effort to shift from, let's say, millet, not the entire plot, but to onions in that case. And that then showed to the farmers how much valuable that income is. And then energy and demand for energy followed rather than led. So I think this is, you have a very good question. I don't have a simple answer, but I thought.
Great. Aaron, I'd like to hand it back to you for any last comments. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Joan. So I think that we could probably talk about this for quite some time. There's a lot to unpack here, and we're all working in the same space. So I'm sure that we have a lot of passionate comments and questions that remain. But I would actually like to pass it back to Vijay, because as the convener of this session, you know, are there any questions that you have for this audience around the data sets? And you know, you've indicated that you would like to know if it's valuable or not. I think everyone is in agreement that this is indeed valuable. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you need to know from us about the data in order to figure out next steps, or if you already have plans for expanding it. You know, as was just asked about the arid regions in Kenya, you know, is this something that can be built out to other markets? And what would you need to do that?
So thank you, Aaron. And first of all, before even I go to those comments, everyone taking the time here with your expertise to indulge us in this exercise, I cannot thank you enough. Because I think we need an iterative process to expose the needs, just like we heard from the lady about livestock, about drylands, right? We need to hear these and incorporate them in our thinking, a collective thinking, not just mine, but collective thinking. So that's one. Secondly, I think this is the beginning of a dialogue. If you can be specific, for example, I think Benson was very specific at the market center. You know where the market is, you know what all activities are being done, but how big is the market? How many different? That's a very, you know, that's something that can be incorporated more easily. If there is something about detecting livestock and its ancillary energy needs, we can try to incorporate that, right? And the other thing we would like to do is maybe, so we have found that it is easier to collect data in the dry season. So the next dry season in Uganda will be perhaps November to March, okay? So we have a window, and we, by the way, this data was literally finished collecting in April, so we haven't even done a whole bunch of analysis. Please send an email either to Pauline. My email is very easy, modi, M-O-D-I, @columbia.edu. I'm, you know, I always have to say it's easy to remember, but no relation, because, you know, there is, of course, a very famous Modi in India. So, but yeah, so it's easy to remember email. So send it, and we can perhaps by email or some other means of communication, make sure that as we embark on the next round, we of course will have to still, my simple, let me say this. If Uganda has 10,000 parishes of 1,000 households each, roughly, okay? Maybe 7,000-8,000 are rural. We can probably afford to do 1 day of a vehicle enumerator team and all that per parish. And you know that that's what costs money, right? Is the real paying for the vehicle, fuel, enumerators. So if we can do that, you know, that's where we are striving, Aaron, is how can we do the best that serves the community within that constraint? So there are some things we heard today that are fairly easy to incorporate without breaking the bank, so to speak. And then we want to go towards a standardized protocol then that works across other countries, as was the first comment of Gauri from IRENA, right? So I think that would be useful because there are other people also gathering data. Note that a lot of our data was not by actually talking to people. It is far cheaper to do that. We are developing a simple vehicle mounted camera system that could make easier. And in the space we are trying to fill, Aaron, is how can we provide useful primary data? Because there are lots of models, lots of tools, lots of practitioners. I think they will make the sausage in their own way, so to speak. They will all find something hopefully useful. So, so if I can propose is, I will send the PowerPoint to everyone. If you need, just send me an email so that we keep an ongoing, thing where if and of course to share the data as we collect, so analysis won't be right away. Analysis does take sometimes time, but at least you see where things are going. So I want to thank a lot of people here. Okay, so I didn't even put up the names of all the students, and they're already in Kampala who did a lot of the effort of actually helping to gather the team. I want to thank the Columbia World Project team who's here, who made all this possible. Otherwise, this would all have been talk from my side. I want to thank the Columbia Global Center for hosting us and making this first hybrid event for their space work. So a big thanks to all the team, to Pauline, to Murugi, to I see 5 other people and who have been doing the whole thing. So I don't know if I've forgotten anyone, and I want to thank also, and I will thank them personally when I get there, to the different ministries of the government of Uganda that were very open and shared and told all their teams to share data and facilitate that in a very, very sort of fluid way. Otherwise, this would have been quite difficult. So on that note, Aaron, or I don't know if anybody else, Peter, if you want to come up and say a word of thanks to us, perhaps. So I'm putting Peter on the spot because he's sort of the financier of this effort. So.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I'm Peter Twyman from Columbia World Projects. Yeah, I just want to thank you, Vijay, for the great presentation and your great work, and all the panelists for participating today, and all of you have joined in person and online. So thank you all very much.
And thank you, Adam.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. And thank you to Vijay and the team at Columbia. Also, thank you for the honor of being asked to moderate this session. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and I don't take it lightly. It's a real honor to be able to coordinate a conversation on such a topic that is important to me. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to working together with all of you to make everything that we discussed a reality. And of course, please get in touch with me as well if you're more interested in our productive use business. As I'm going to take my last second here to just ask, and plug support for our company. We're always in fundraising mode as a company that's doing something new and different that no one else is really doing on the productive use support side. We really want to allow energy companies to be energy companies rather than have to be agriculturalist companies and e-mobility companies and customer support companies. Every sector deserves to have service providers. And right now we really are seeing the need due to the complexity of what we've just discussed for experts to emerge in this area. And it's really not fair, I think, to ask every mini-grid developer to also be basically a rural development company. And that's an enormous challenge that the entire sector has really faced over the past couple of years, where we've really been asking companies to do things that they never intended to do. And some of the companies like Equatorial Power they're creating their model around these anchor loads. But in order to really see the sector grow, we have to have companies that help grow the number of those anchor clients, and to really make a situation where every customer is a profitable customer for the sector. And we need to work together to figure out how to do this, because it will not be easy, even with great data. As some of the panelists mentioned, it may have been Federico, in fact, once you get on the ground, things often look very, very different to the data sets. And I think that the training point that Vijay mentioned as well, EnerGrow offers training to all of our customers, because at the end of the day, really we're asking people to introduce two new things into their lives. One is electricity, and two is a productive use appliance that costs a lot of money. And there's early adopters to every technology. There's the people that go and buy the new iPhone the day it comes out, but most people, they wait a year or 2 years. And maybe they don't get the big flagship phone, they get the cheaper one. And maybe that cheaper one breaks after 6 months. And we really, as a sector, have to recognize that, not everyone is going to connect to productive uses on the first day or the first month, and that they are also going to have trial and error with what the best technologies are for them. So this is not going to be an automatic positive change. It is something that will take time and resources, and we have to figure it out together. And we're one of those players that's doing it. So we would be very keen to be partners with any of you on the chat here today. And yeah, I'll just end there with my plug and a word of cautious optimism. And thanks again to Vijay and to Colombia for hosting this very important event. And with that, I'll close from my end. But if anyone else wants to say a thank you, yes, please go ahead. All right, with that, I think we'll sign off and officially close. So thank you, everyone. Take care.